Hi, I'm Pam Lundell, and this is A Widow's Heart. Today, you're going to hear from Gary and Mary, and as I listened to them share, I just kept thinking, this is one of those stories that will really stay with me. It's a story of grief, but also a story of faith and forgiveness, and of God being present in ways we may not expect. Here are Gary and Mary.
My name is Gary Malychewski, and this is my wife, Mary.
Hi.
And this is our story. Back then, I was a young driver, and I was coming around a 20-mile-an-hour curve, and I was probably going 40, 45. I know I was speeding, and I was breaking the law. And I came around, and I see a little girl in the road riding her bike, and I had to go completely into the other lane, otherwise I would have hit her. And as I passed by her, I stopped my UPS vehicle and I went back and I started talking to her and I said, "Little girl, I got a daughter the same age as you." And I said, "If I would have hit you, I would have killed you." And had there been a car coming the other direction, it would have been a bad accident and stuff. And so I asked her where she lived, and she said that she lived up on the hill. And so I went and I drove up on the hill and I started telling the dad about how I almost hit his little girl. And then he started bawling and I started bawling. And then I'm telling him what happened. And he goes, "Wait, so nothing happened?" I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, then why are we crying?" I said, "I don't know." And it was a way for the next 2 weeks, I struggled sleeping. And I just pondered the whole thing. What in the world? Why did I go up there? And what was I searching for? And I realized that I was searching for his forgiveness because I knew I was doing something I shouldn't have done in speeding on that road. It was really a tough thing for me to get past. I did sleep real well.
Then in November, later on that year, we went to a family life marriage conference. And the whole weekend, Rick and Judy Taylor were the speakers. And they had written a book 20 years prior about what they were speaking about. And what they were speaking about was the death of their son. And it was just so hard for me to hear because I'd never experienced anybody really close to me, let alone a child die. And so anyways, at the end of the weekend, we each bought a book. And I bought one on marriage enrichment. And Gary bought the book they had written.
She kept putting it back down.
Yeah,
and I'm like, "What are you doing?"
I kept leaving it before we go pay. And he's like, "We need that book." He goes, "One of these days, you're going to have to deal with death." And I go, "Yeah, this is the death of a child." So
I remember when I was sitting at the listening to them talk about the death of their child, I was getting just absolutely, my heart was just, I was really, really upset. And I was like, how can they talk about the death of their son and not have any emotion about it? And it was really, really hard on me because I'm like, you lost your child. And then later on I thought, wait a second, you know what? They told this story so many times and it was like 20 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I was too hard on them and stuff, you know?
So anyways, they wrote the book called When Life is Changed Forever. We brought the book home. I put it on the bookshelf that month. It was close to Christmas. So we were getting ready for Christmas. We, the weekend before, we had actually dressed up and took our kids to see the Nutcracker on Sunday night to the evening show. We wanted to all dress up and it was really fun. And then we had also went to Chinese food, which was our family's favorite dinner and stuff. And then on Monday, me and a bunch of homeschool moms made cookies together. And the kids, I felt like it was a ministry I had with the kids. And what we do is we package up cookies and we'd give them to all the service people. We'd give them to the mailman, to the paper boy back then when there were paper, people delivering the paper to your door and they're teenagers. And the garbage man, their cycle man, just everybody who did service for us. And so that night I went to a homeschooling meeting and had talked to a gentleman there by the name of Mike, who was very instrumental the next day. So anyways, Tuesday morning, Gary went off to work, and I had got up and we were getting ready to, do our day, and the kids were excited about giving the cookies out, and Hannah wanted to take cookies out. And so we heard the people coming down the road, and she wanted to take the cookies out. So she went out there, and I was just super distraught because it just didn't seem right. And next thing I know, I'm just like, he's going, and I don't see her. And I just started screaming, and I just kept screaming, and I ran out there, and I was like, she's gone. I ran back in, and I got the phone, and I called 911, and they wanted me to try to resuscitate her. But I'm like, there's nothing I can do, And then somehow the police showed that the driver ended up stopping. I don't know exactly everything that happened because it was just such a traumatic experience. And anyways, I ended up in the house, and a police officer was sitting with me on the couch waiting for Gary to come home. This police officer says, I have a little girl, and about your daughter's age. And he goes, I'm so sorry. And we started talking somehow, and I found out he homeschooled. And anyways, he was the guy I talked to the night before. And I said, I remember you. You let me into the library last night to return some books. Do you remember that? And he goes, yes. And I go, can you please pray for me? Because I know you're a Christian. And so anyways, he did.
So when I was driving my UPS truck, what had happened was my bosses had sent me a text that I needed to go down and meet a boss down at the McDonald's. And I'm like, what's going on? I said, why do I got to go down there? Because I'm a, UPSer, and I know what happens if you got to meet up with a boss. It ain't good. And so then they said, you're not in trouble, Gary. Everything's fine. So then all of a sudden I got worried, and I called my wife, and I said, is everything okay? And she says, Hannah's dead. And I just absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs. I probably blew her ears out because I couldn't believe what she had just said. And so then I cleaned my face up because I started crying. And I said, okay, what happened? She goes, Hannah's dead. And I absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs again. And then I cleaned my face up, and I'm driving down in my UPS truck, which I should not have been doing. And I can't hardly see driving. And then I asked, tell me what happened. And she said, Hannah dead. And I just screamed again. And then I said, I have to get off the phone. And I got off the phone. And I could hardly even see driving down Pumpkin Ridge, and because it's a kind of a windy road and stuff. And then I met up with my boss, and he looks at me and he goes, you know what happened, don't you? And I was like, yeah. And I already cried so hard that I was able to just kind of keep it under control a little bit. He drove me home, which took an hour, and I pondered the whole entire situation of what God had been taking me through and preparing me for this moment. And so I got to the house, and then I said, I need to see the driver of the truck. And so they said, well, it's going to take a few minutes. And so then they bring me around the back, and the driver's standing there, and there's like 5 cops around him. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. I don't know why there's 5 cops, because I wasn't thinking anything bad. But I guess, probably sometimes people, they don't react in a good way. And so I went up to him, and I gave him a hug, and I told him I forgave him, because I knew that that's what God had prepared me for that day. And my brother had hate in his heart and was looking at me, and he wanted to kill the guy. And he said, hate left his heart. And he said, how can I hate somebody where my own brother doesn't hate him? Yeah. And so it was a very, very difficult day.
I didn't know how the driver ended up at her memorial service, but we had a memorial service. So anyways, he asked if the driver was there, and he called him forward, and then Gary gave him a hug in the front of the church and stuff, which was very, emotional and everything. Also, I talked to Judy Taylor, the lady who, her husband wrote the book, When Life Has Changed Forever. And I talked to her on what would have been Hannah's 8th birthday. And it was very, she understood. She knew my position of being the one on watch that day, and to have your child die. And to die unexpectedly is so, I can't even explain it. It's, you just don't want to have to go through it.
I took my, after our daughter had been killed, I don't know if it was the next day or whatever, but I took her in the kitchen and I hugged my wife and I said, honey, God tells us that we all have,
our days are numbered.
Our days are numbered, and we don't know when those days are. And I was hugging her and I said, if she was in this house right now and this was her day, there's nothing you could have done. And God would have taken her. It happens all the time where somebody unbelievably dies for some reason. And my goal isn't that my wife would to be completely broken and feel guilty about things, because mistakes or poor choices or whatever, we make them all the time as human beings. And over the years, I've had a good relationship with Chris, the driver. In fact, I just talked to him yesterday. He's thriving at his company, and I just tell him how proud I am of him. And I told him, I said, there's no winners in something what we went through. I said, you're a loser. I'm a loser. The company was a loser.
Only
There's
Hannah.
no winners.
Hannah's the winner because she's in heaven.
Yeah, my daughter's in heaven with the Lord. And Ron Middlestad and Daryl Chambliss at Waste Connections. Ron's been amazing. He's blessed our family so much. Yeah.
The 10-year anniversary of Hannah's death, they gave Caleb and Josiah college money for college.
And they just, out of the goodness of their hearts, and they're Christian people, they're Christian businesses. And I mean, we were so shocked that 10 years after our daughter had passed away that they were like looking us up. And I didn't understand, but they were just, there's some very wonderful people at Waste Connections.
And they took care of their driver too.
Yeah, they took care of their driver. They didn't just write him off as a number, which is amazing. And it's because they're Christian men who are running Waste Connections.
Well, we decided to go to Grief Share. It was being offered at our church. And the lady and man who run it are Shirley and Jim Mozina. And Shirley's the one who's an author who, when she heard her story, she wanted to write an article. And then when they invited us over and actually heard the full story, they're like, this is more like a book. And so that's how.
Well, they had first asked me, and I'm like, no. I said, I've had people wanting to write a book for a long time, and I've always said no. And I look back and I just realized that we weren't ready to write a book. And when the time finally came, it's like, I finally said, okay, you can write a book.
So that's it. That's our story. Thank you so much for listening today. Gary and Mary shared a story that's not easy to tell, and I'm really grateful they were willing to do that. Their story is a reminder that even in the middle of heartbreak, God is still there, still near, still able to carry us when life feels too heavy. Thanks for spending this time with me on A Widow's Heart. Take care, and we'll see you next time.